Now you'll notice on the far right, let me cancel out of that, we have loading screens. Basically what happened there is if you click on one of these loading screens, it will prompt you to open up an existing loading screen that you've already made. Now normally you may not have some, so what you can do is you can go over to the number here and click on one of them and then click edit loading screen. These are basically the exact same scripts that we've seen before. We have some music, we have a background, and then we have some items here, which they call menu items. We have a header image, which is normally something that says loading game or loading level. We also have a loading box and a loading bar. Now these two here are exactly the same as, say you're loading up Microsoft Windows, you'll see a progress bar going. This is what they like to call the loading box and loading bar image. The same thing applies where you can use the X and Y coordinates to place these items exactly where you want on the screen. So after we have our levels set up, I'm going to go up to textures, which we have light map settings and texture quality. Now for light map settings we have three options. We have no light maps, soft light maps, and full shadow light maps. No light maps means that the level will be rendered only using ambient light. So we had the default setting of 25 in there, so the level will be lit up with 25% light, and it will not render any shadows or any lights that you've put in. For that kind of stuff, you'll want to change to soft light maps. This is going to render your level using not only ambient light, but it will also render any markers, so the light markers that you put in, either static or dynamic. Now one thing it will not render are shadows. You'll see these pictures down here. The one on the left is no light maps, and the one on the right is full light maps. So soft light maps is in between, basically meaning these entities here will not cast shadows when using soft light maps. If you want your entities to cast shadows, what you're going to have to do is select full shadow light maps. Therefore you'll get ambient lights, you'll get your static and dynamic lights, and you're also going to get shadows on entities. So moving over to texture quality, we have low, medium, and high. By default, all the textures in FPS Creator were created at 512 by 512, which means 512 pixels wide by 512 pixels high. Now depending on your graphics card, you're going to have to select one of these different options. Now let's pretend you wanted your game, because you had so many textures in it and it was so intense, you had to use low quality textures. This is just a general setting which can be overridden per entity. So let's pretend you had a note that you wanted the user to read laying on a table, but you were using low texture quality and the user couldn't read it. You could overwrite this general setting by using the property reduce texture in the entity, which then you can tell the texture to use high texture quality instead of low. So basically this texture quality setting just resizes the textures accordingly. Now we have Arena. This we're going to cover in our upcoming segment when we make a multiplayer game. So I'm going to skip over to the final one here, which is build settings. We have executable, visuals, and progress of build. In executable we have the folder which FPS Creator is going to save everything to. We also have our game executable name. This is going to be the executable that your friend or the user is going to run to load up your game. Underneath that we have visuals. We have no shader effects and full shader effects. What shaders are is basically when newer graphics cards come out, they have shaders that can reflect, say, water, reflect ice, or even bullets that hit the wall. They can have sparks fly off the wall, that sort of stuff. Depending on your graphics card, you're either going to be able to use shaders or not. All the new graphics cards should be able to support full shader effects through DirectX 9. but the old graphics cards you may want to keep it on no shader effects. So what this means is you won't get reflections on water or on ice or something like that. Keep going here and we'll see automatic floor and dynamic lights. Automatic floor is unchecked by default. If you check it, what will happen is if you've ever created a level that doesn't have any walls and you jump off the side and you look down, you'll notice that even though you're falling to the ground is not really moving. So by checking automatic floor, FPS Creator by default will put in the ground for you on the lowest layer, so layer 0, and it will put in the default ground of just a gray floor. So when you jump off the level and you look down, you'll see the floor coming towards your face instead of you kind of floating in mid-air and not knowing where the ground is. I normally leave that unchecked because it's always good to make sure in your map that you don't have any holes so the player actually can't fall out of your level unless you're going for that sort of thing. Over on the right we have dynamic lights. Basically the setting enables FPS Creator to render things like lights flashing on or off, lights being turned on or off by a light switch. Any light that is dynamic that has a script attached to it will be rendered properly if you have this checked. If it's unchecked, your flashing lights will be lights that are always on, or your light switch will have a light that's always on, you can't turn it off. The final thing that we have in our build game is a progressive build, and it consists of just a progress bar, some messages, and this build game executable. Once you click this button, it's going to take all of our settings that we've put in here and build an executable. So I've clicked it, and you can see that some of our options have been grayed out. This just means that when the game is building, we can't change these options. Now normally what you'll want to do, depending on how fast your computer is build these games at night. So when you go to bed, set it up, then it will start building. Now you'll see mine has already started, and it's building the first level of 6. So what it's doing is basically finding all the objects that we use in the level and putting them all together, as well as the textures, the sounds, and it's going to do that for every single level, so it's going to do that for 6 levels. So that's basically it for this build game. Our next tutorial will be looking at the multiplayer settings, so we'll see you then.